The will was read on a Thursday. By Friday morning, my sister had sent me an invoice for $89,000 with a subject line that read, "What you owe the family." By Friday afternoon, I had spoken to Aunt Carol's attorney. By Friday evening, my sister's attorney had called her. She didn't pick up. But let me go back to the beginning, because the real story doesn't start with an invoice. It starts with a cup of tea. Aunt Carol made tea the same way every single time I came to visit. Loose leaf, steeped exactly 4 minutes, poured into the same blue ceramic mug with the chipped handle that she had owned since before I was born. She never asked if I wanted tea. She just put the kettle on when she heard my car in the driveway, the way some people turn on a light when someone they love is coming home. I don't think she ever made tea for my sister Melissa. Not because she was cruel. Aunt Carol was the least cruel person I have ever known, but because Melissa never came to visit. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not for the long Sunday afternoons when Carol and I would sit at her kitchen table and talk about nothing and everything until the light outside changed and I realized I'd been there for 4 hours without noticing. Melissa came for Christmas when the gifts were good, and for the reading of the will when Carol was gone. That was the full extent of her relationship with the woman whose estate she tried to take. I grew up in a suburb outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, the younger of 2 daughters in a family that looked normal from the outside and was considerably more complicated on the inside. My parents were decent people who loved us in the distracted, well-intentioned way of people who are always slightly overwhelmed by their own lives. My father worked long hours at an insurance company, my mother managed a dental office, and came home tired every evening, and the space between their busyness and our needs was filled, more often than not, by Aunt Carol. She was my mother's older sister, never married, worked as a high school English teacher for 32 years, and lived in a 3-bedroom craftsman house on a quiet street in Durham that she had bought in her 40s with her savings and her teacher's pension, and the proceeds of a small inheritance from her own parents. The house had a front porch with 2 rocking chairs, a garden that she tended with obsessive care from March through October, and a kitchen that always smelled like whatever she was baking. Lemon pound cake in the summer, apple pie in the fall, a particular kind of ginger cookie at Christmas that I have tried to replicate a dozen times and never quite managed. Carol was the person I called when my first relationship ended badly, when I got passed over for a promotion I deserved, when I needed someone who would listen without immediately trying to fix. She was also the person who showed up at my apartment with soup when I had the flu, who remembered the names of my coworkers and asked about them by name, who sent birthday cards that arrived exactly on the right day every year without fail. She was, in the truest sense of the word, my person. Melissa was 4 years older than me and had always occupied a different orbit entirely. She was sharp where I was quiet, aggressive where I was careful, and had a relationship with money that I can only describe as personal. She thought about it the way other people think about oxygen, with a constant low-level awareness of how much she had and how much she needed, and how much other people had that she didn't. She had married Derek Chen when she was 28, a corporate accountant with cold eyes and a firm handshake, and the kind of smile that arrived slightly after it should, like a translation running a half-second behind the original. They lived in a large house in a good neighborhood in Charlotte, drove matching SUVs, and had 2 kids in private school whose tuition Melissa mentioned at every family gathering with the frequency of someone keeping score. She was not a bad mother, as far as I could tell. She was not a bad wife. She was simply a person whose primary relationship was with the idea of what she deserved, and that relationship had a way of crowding out everything else. Aunt Carol was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 18 months before she died. She told me first, called me on a Tuesday evening in March, her voice steady and practical. The voice of a woman who had decided to treat this information as a problem to be managed rather than a catastrophe to be mourned. "It's stage 3, she said. "The prognosis is what it is. I'm not going to pretend it's better than it is, and I'm not going to fall apart about it. What I am going to do is get my affairs in order, which is why I'm telling you now." She paused, and in the pause, I heard something underneath the steadiness. Not fear, but something more complicated, a kind of urgent clarity, the sound of a person who has been handed a deadline and has decided to use it. "There are things I need to make sure of," she said. "Things I want to be certain about before I can't be certain about them anymore." I drove to Durham the next morning. I sat at her kitchen table and drank the tea she made me, and we talked for 6 hours. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, without either of us making a formal announcement, it was understood that I would be the one who showed up, who drove her to treatments, who sat in waiting rooms, who called the doctors when she couldn't remember the right questions to ask. I was the one who came, and I came because I wanted to, because she was Carol, because the idea of her going through this alone was something I could not hold in my head for more than a few seconds before it became unbearable. Melissa called Carol twice during the 18 months of her illness. I know this because Carol told me, without bitterness, in the same practical voice she used for everything. She called in April and again around Thanksgiving, she said. Both times she asked how I was feeling and then asked about the house. She took a sip of her tea. She didn't ask about the house directly. She asked if I'd thought about what would happen to it, which amounts to the same thing. I didn't say anything. Carol looked at me over the rim of her mug and smiled, not sadly, just knowingly, the smile of a woman who has understood something for a long time and has made her peace with it. "I've handled it," she said. "Everything is handled. You don't need to worry about Melissa." I believed her. I should have paid more attention to what handled meant. Carol died on a Wednesday in September, at home, in her own bedroom, with the windows open and the smell of the garden coming through the screens. I was there. I had been there for the last 4 days, sleeping on the couch in the living room, getting up when she called, holding her hand through the nights when the pain was bad. The morning she died, she squeezed my hand once, very deliberately, the way you press a button to make sure it works, and then she was gone. I sat with her for a long time before I called anyone. The house was very quiet. The blue ceramic mug was on the kitchen counter where I'd left it after my morning tea, and the garden outside the window was doing what it always did in September. The late-season flowers holding their color with a kind of stubborn brightness, and I thought she would have wanted the windows open. So I left them open, and I sat with her in the quiet room, in the September light, and I said goodbye to the person who had always made the tea before I asked. I called Melissa from the driveway 40 minutes later. She made the appropriate noises, the sharp intake of breath, the "oh no," the "I'm so sorry," delivered in the voice people use when they are sorry but not devastated, when the news is sad but not surprising, and the emotional response is proportional to the distance they kept. "I'll come for the funeral," she said. "Derek can't make it, work thing, but I'll be there." She arrived the afternoon before the service, drove up in her white Lexus, hugged me in the driveway with the efficiency of someone completing a task on a list, and then walked into Carol's house with her eyes moving across every surface in a way that had nothing to do with grief. I watched her open cabinet doors in the kitchen. I watched her walk through the bedrooms with her phone raised, the camera clicking softly. I told myself she was processing loss in her own way. I told myself that people grieve differently. That was the first thing I got wrong. But I didn't know that yet. I was tired and sad, and the house smelled like Carol, and I didn't have the bandwidth for what I was seeing. The funeral was held on a Saturday morning at the church Carol had attended for 20 years. The pastor spoke about her patience and her generosity and the particular quality of her attention, the way she made people feel heard, really heard, in a world that was increasingly bad at listening. 3 of her former students came and spoke about her, and one of them cried, and I thought, this is who she was. This is what she built. This is what matters. Melissa sat beside me in the front pew in a black dress that was slightly too formal for the occasion, her posture perfect, her expression arranged into appropriate solemnity. She did not cry. At the graveside, as the pastor finished his final prayer, and the small crowd began to disperse in the way crowds disperse at funerals, slowly, quietly, with the particular reluctance of people who don't want to go back to ordinary life quite yet, I felt Melissa's hand on my arm. She steered me gently away from the others, toward the edge of the cemetery, where the old oak trees made a corridor of shade, and she reached into her purse and produced an envelope. White, letter-sized, my name on the front in her handwriting. She held it out to me with the composure of a woman who has rehearsed this moment and is confident in how it will go. "I think you should look at this when you have a minute," she said. Her voice was soft, concerned, almost apologetic. The voice of someone delivering difficult news they wish they didn't have to deliver. "There are some family financial matters that need to be addressed now that Carol is gone. Derek and I have put everything together. We just want to make sure everything is handled fairly." She pressed the envelope into my hand, squeezed my fingers around it in a gesture that was meant to feel like comfort and felt like something else entirely, and then walked back toward the remaining mourners with the unhurried gait of a woman who has done what she came to do. I stood there under the oak trees with the envelope in my hand and the September sun cutting through the leaves above me, and something cold moving through my chest. Not shock, not yet, but the first tremor of it, the body's early warning system registering a threat before the mind has caught up. I didn't open the envelope at the graveside. I put it in my purse and drove back to Carol's house for the reception, and I smiled at people and accepted casseroles and thanked the former students for coming, and the whole time the envelope sat in my purse like a stone at the bottom of a bag, its weight disproportionate to its size. I opened it that evening, after the last guest had left, and the house was quiet again. I sat at Carol's kitchen table, the same table where we had drunk 10,000 cups of tea, where she had helped me with my college applications, where she had sat across from me and told me about her diagnosis with her hands wrapped around her mug, and I opened the envelope. Inside was a document. 4 pages, printed, with a header at the top that read, "Estate of Carol Ann Whitmore. Outstanding family obligations." Below the header was an itemized list. I read it twice, slowly, the way you read something when you're hoping the words will rearrange themselves into a different meaning on the second pass. Funeral coordination and expenses, $12,000. Family loan, 2019, $35,000. Caregiving coordination and oversight, $28,000. Miscellaneous family support, 2018 to 2023, $14,000. Total, $89,000. Due within 30 days of estate settlement. And at the bottom, a line that I read 3 times before I understood what I was looking at. As the primary beneficiary of Carol Whitmore's estate, you are responsible for satisfying these obligations before taking possession of any inherited assets. My hands went cold. The kind of cold that starts at the fingertips and moves inward, blood retreating to the core, the body's response to information it doesn't know how to process. $12,000 for funeral coordination. I had coordinated the funeral. I had made every call, chosen every flower, written the program, selected the readings, communicated with the pastor. Melissa had shown up the afternoon before and taken a seat in the front pew. $28,000 for caregiving coordination. I had driven Carol to 47 medical appointments over 18 months. I had managed her medications, communicated with her doctors, slept on her couch for the last week of her life. Melissa had called twice and asked about the house. And the $35,000 family loan. I had no memory of Carol ever lending Melissa $35,000. None. I had been close enough to Carol, present enough in her life, that I was reasonably confident I would have known about a loan of that size. And yet there it was, itemized, official looking, dated 2019, as if the date alone conferred legitimacy. But I had not yet found what Carol had left me. That came later. That night, unable to sleep, I went through the small oak desk in Carol's study. The desk where she had paid her bills and written her lesson plans and kept the documents that mattered. I was looking for anything that might help me understand the invoice. What I found, in a manila folder labeled simply "For Sarah" in Carol's handwriting, was a letter. 3 pages. Written in the last weeks of her life, when her handwriting had gotten smaller and more effortful, but was still precise. Still Carol's. The letter began, "Sweetheart, if you're reading this, it means Melissa has already made her move. I want you to know that I expected it, I prepared for it, and I need you to stay calm and follow the instructions below." What followed was the clearest, most methodical document I had ever read. Carol had known. She had known with the certainty of a woman who had watched her niece's relationship with money for 30 years, who had lent Melissa $35,000 in 2019. Not the other way around, Melissa had borrowed it, and Carol had the signed promissory note in the folder to prove it, and who had received exactly $0 in repayment over 4 years. Carol had known about Derek's habit of filing liens on property as a pressure tactic. He had done it to Derek's own mother during a property dispute 3 years earlier, and Carol's attorney had flagged it as a risk. Carol had known that Melissa would contest the will on grounds of mental incapacity. "I have recorded a video," Carol wrote, "with my attorney present, dated 6 weeks ago, in which I am very clearly of sound mind. The video is with James Whitfield at Whitfield Law. Call him first thing Friday morning. He is expecting your call." She had also known about the fake invoice. "The funeral expenses are fabricated. You handled everything, and I have the receipts, which are also in this folder. The caregiving charge is an attempt to monetize your love, which is disgusting and also legally baseless. And the $35,000 family loan is the money Melissa borrowed from me in 2019 and never repaid. The promissory note is in this folder. My attorney has a copy." And then, at the bottom of the 3rd page, in letters slightly larger than the rest, underlined once, "Do not pay a single dollar. Do not sign a single paper. Call James Whitfield. He will handle the rest. I love you. I planned for this. You are protected." I sat at Carol's desk with the letter in my hands and the folder open in front of me, and I felt something happen inside me that was different from anything I had felt before. Not anger, not grief, something colder and more precise. The sensation of a lens coming into perfect focus. She had known. She had spent the last months of her life building a legal fortress around the things she wanted me to have, and she had left me the instructions for how to use it. The blue ceramic mug was on the desk beside me. I had carried it from the kitchen without thinking about it, and I wrapped both hands around it and held it the way she always held hers. And I breathed, and I made a list in my head of everything I needed to do in the morning. I was not afraid. That was the thing I noticed most. I should have been afraid. The invoice, the threatened lien, the impending legal challenge. But instead, I felt something I can only describe as the particular calm of a person who has just been handed a very good hand of cards and is trying to decide in what order to play them. Friday morning, I called James Whitfield at 7:45. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting the call. He was 60, unhurried, with a voice like old wood. Solid, resonant, the voice of a man who had been in difficult rooms for a long time and had learned that the most powerful thing you could do in a difficult room was refuse to be rushed. "Your aunt told me you'd call," he said. "She also told me what your sister would do. She was right about all of it, which doesn't surprise me. Carol was one of the most prepared clients I've ever had." He walked me through the situation with a thoroughness that made me feel, for the first time since the funeral, like the ground beneath me was solid. The will was clear, properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. Carol had been examined by her physician and a neuropsychologist 6 weeks before her death and certified as fully competent. The video, recorded in James's office with 2 witnesses present, showed Carol speaking clearly and at length about her wishes and her reasons for them, including, James said with a slight emphasis, her reasons for not including Melissa. The promissory note for $35,000, signed by Melissa in 2019, was legally enforceable. The lien Derek had filed, which James had already discovered that morning through a title search, was based on a fraudulent claim and was challengeable. "Your sister's attorney filed the will contest yesterday afternoon," James said. "We'll respond Monday. But I want you to understand, this is not a close case." Carol made sure of that. I also called my friend Dana, who worked at a title company and knew more about real estate law than most attorneys. I called her from the driveway of Carol's house, sitting in my car with the engine off and the morning light coming through the windshield and the folder on the passenger seat. I told her about the lien. She made a sound that was not quite a word. "Derek filed a lien based on a family debt claim," she said. That's aggressive. But if the underlying debt is fraudulent, the lien is challengeable. You'd file a motion to release, show that the claimed debt doesn't exist, and the lien gets removed. It's not fast, but it's not complicated either, if you have the documentation." I had the documentation. I had Carol's folder, Carol's promissory note, Carol's letter, and James Whitfield, who had clearly been preparing for this for months. What I did not have yet was the full picture of how far Melissa and Derek's plan extended. That arrived on Monday morning, when James called me with something he'd found during the weekend. Derek had not only filed the lien, he had also contacted 2 of Carol's neighbors, presenting himself as the executor of the estate, and asked them to sign statements attesting that Carol had seemed confused in the last year of her life. Both neighbors had declined. One of them had called James directly to report the contact. "He told them he was the executor," James said, and his voice had taken on a quality I hadn't heard before. Not anger, but the particular coolness of a professional whose patience for bad behavior has reached its limit. "He is not the executor. He has no legal standing in this estate whatsoever. What he did constitutes impersonation of an estate officer, which is a violation of North Carolina statute. I've documented it. It will be part of our response." I sat in Carol's kitchen and held the phone and felt the thing inside me that had been cold and focused become something harder. This was not grief anymore. This was not even shock. This was the very clear understanding that the people across from me had constructed a deliberate, layered, legally aggressive attempt to take what Carol had left me, and that they had underestimated both Carol and me. That was their mistake, and it was going to cost them. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep well. I lay in Carol's guest room. I had been staying at the house, tending her garden, taking care of the things that needed taking care of. And I watched the ceiling, and I thought about Melissa. I thought about her arriving at the funeral in her too formal dress, her eyes cataloging the rooms, the camera clicking softly. I thought about her handing me the envelope at the graveside with that practiced expression of reluctant necessity, as if she were doing something painful but required by duty, rather than something calculated to the last decimal point. I thought about the subject line, "What you owe the family." And I thought about what Carol had written underneath her signature at the end of the letter in the oak desk. "The only debt in this family, sweetheart, was always theirs, not yours." I got up at 5 in the morning, went to the kitchen, and made tea. Loose leaf, 4 minutes, the blue ceramic mug. I stood at the kitchen window while it steeped and looked at the garden in the early morning light. The late-season flowers still holding their color. The rosemary Aunt Carol had planted along the back fence, thick and fragrant even in October. I drank the tea, and I thought about what James had told me to expect, and by the time I set the mug down in the sink, I was ready. The hearing was at the Durham County Courthouse, a Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock. Melissa arrived with her attorney, a young man in a suit that was slightly too expensive for the occasion, the way Melissa herself was always slightly too much for any given room. Derek was with her, in the back row, his face arranged into an expression of neutral support that didn't quite conceal the calculation running underneath it. I sat at the respondent's table with James and his associate, a young woman named Priya, who had the calm, focused energy of someone who has done this many times and enjoys it. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Patricia Chambers, silver-haired, reading glasses on a chain, an expression that suggested she had heard most varieties of human foolishness and was not easily impressed by any of them. Melissa's attorney presented the will contest first. His argument rested on two claims: that Carol had demonstrated signs of cognitive decline in the last year of her life, making her susceptible to undue influence, and that my frequent presence in the house constituted that influence. He used words like isolation and dependence and vulnerable adult, and with each word, I felt James make a small, almost imperceptible movement beside me. Not fidgeting, just the slight shift of a person who knows exactly what is coming and is waiting with great patience for the right moment to deploy it. When Melissa's attorney finished, Judge Chambers looked at him over her reading glasses for a moment, then turned to James. "Counselor," she said. James stood up. He was not a dramatic man. He didn't perform, didn't grandstand, didn't use the theatrical pauses that some attorneys use to signal importance. He simply presented with the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need theatrics because the facts are doing all the work. First, the physician's certification of Carol's competency, dated 6 weeks before her death. Second, the neuropsychologist's evaluation, same date, which used phrases like intact executive function and no evidence of cognitive impairment. Third, the video. James had a laptop set up, and he played 4 minutes of it. Carol, sitting in James's office, looking directly at the camera, speaking in her clear, unhurried voice. "I am leaving my estate to my niece Sarah," she said on the screen, "because she is the person who was present, who came when I needed someone, who sat with me in the hard parts. I am not leaving anything to my niece Melissa, because Melissa was not present, and because I have reason to believe she would contest this will the moment I was gone, which is why I am recording this video. I want it on record that I am of sound mind, that I love both of my nieces, and that this decision reflects my considered judgment and my wishes and nothing else." She looked at the camera for a moment after she finished, and the look was so characteristically Carol, patient, clear-eyed, slightly amused, that my throat closed around something I had to breathe through carefully to keep from making a sound. Judge Chambers watched the screen. When it ended, she removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench and looked at Melissa's attorney with the expression of a woman who has just had her time wasted in a way she finds professionally offensive. "Counselor," she said, "I'm going to ask you directly. Do you have any evidence of cognitive impairment that postdates this evaluation and this recording?" Melissa's attorney hesitated for just a moment. 1 second, maybe less, but in a quiet courtroom, a hesitation that small is very loud. "We have witness statements indicating sworn affidavits. We were in the process of obtaining, so no." She set her pen down. "The will contest is denied. The will of Carol Ann Whitmore is valid and shall be executed as written." She looked at Melissa's attorney over her glasses. "I'd also like to note for the record that the video we just watched suggests that the decedent anticipated this challenge, which rather undermines the argument that she lacked the judgment to execute a will." There was a silence in the room. Melissa's attorney gathered his papers with the careful, deliberate movements of a man trying not to show how badly this has gone. Melissa herself was very still, her posture perfect, her face arranged into something neutral, but her left hand, resting on the table, was pressed flat against the surface with a pressure that blanched her knuckles white. But James wasn't finished. He stood again before Melissa's attorney could speak, and he said, in that same unhurried voice, "Your Honor, the respondent has one additional matter to address." He presented the lien Derek had filed, the legal documentation, the fraudulent nature of the underlying debt claim, Derek's misrepresentation to Carol's neighbors. He presented the promissory note from 2019, signed by Melissa, witnessed, notarized, for $35,000 borrowed from Carol and never repaid. And then he placed on the table, with the careful precision of a man who has been waiting to do this for months, a printed copy of an email thread between Derek and Melissa from 8 months earlier, obtained through discovery, in which Derek outlined, in the language of a corporate accountant making a business plan, their strategy for claiming the estate, the lien, the will contest, the neighbor statements, the invoice. "What you owe the family," Derek had written in one email, "is actually a pretty good subject line. Use it." There was a sound in the courtroom, not a gasp. More like a collective, involuntary intake of breath, the sound a room makes when something lands that cannot be taken back. Judge Chambers looked at the email thread for a long moment. Then she looked at Derek, in the back row, who had gone the color of old paper. Then she looked at Melissa, whose perfect posture had developed, in the last 30 seconds, a barely perceptible lean. The body's response to ground that is no longer solid beneath it. "Counselor," the judge said to Melissa's attorney, "I'm going to give you a moment to consult with your client." She did not say it kindly. The lien was removed. The fraudulent debt claims were dismissed. Derek's misrepresentation to the neighbors was referred to the state bar for review. He was not an attorney, but he had represented himself as having legal authority he did not have, which opened other doors that James was already walking through. The promissory note for $35,000 was entered as a valid debt, enforceable against Melissa. Melissa was ordered to pay Carol's estate's legal fees, $42,000. The math, which Melissa and Derek had presumably done before they started, had produced a result they had not planned for. They had come to take $89,000 and left owing $77,000. And they left without the estate, without the house, without a single dollar of what they had come for. I was in the parking lot outside the courthouse when James found me. I was standing next to my car, looking at nothing in particular. The other cars, the bare October trees along the street, the ordinary midday world going about its business with no awareness that something significant had just happened in a room inside that building. James stood beside me for a moment without speaking, which was one of the things I appreciated most about him. His comfort with silence, his refusal to fill every space with words. "Carol would have liked today," he said finally. "She would have liked it very much." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice quite yet. He handed me a card. "Call me when you're ready to finalize the transfer. The house is yours." He shook my hand and walked back toward the courthouse, and I stood in the parking lot in the October sun, and I thought about Carol at the kitchen window, looking at her garden, and about the folder in the oak desk that she had labeled, "For Sarah," and about the particular kind of love that shows up not in grand gestures, but in preparation, in the careful, patient, thorough work of protecting someone before the threat even arrives. I drove back to Durham that afternoon with the windows down, the October air cold and smelling of leaves and wood smoke, and the particular sharpness of a season in transition. When I got to Carol's house, I went straight to the kitchen. I filled the kettle. I took the blue ceramic mug from the cabinet where it had always lived, the one with the chipped handle, the one she had used for longer than I had been alive. I measured the tea. I waited 4 minutes. I poured it. I carried the mug to the kitchen table and sat in Carol's chair, her chair, the one that faced the window in the garden. And I drank the tea while the afternoon light moved across the floor in the slow way it does in October, when the sun is lower and the shadows are longer, and everything has a quality of ripe, particular beauty that you know is almost finished. The garden outside the window was doing what Carol had always said it did in October. "Going gold," she called it, the late season flowers catching the afternoon light and holding it. I sat with the mug wrapped in both hands the way she always sat, and I thought about her subject line, the one Derek had written, the one Melissa had sent. "What you owe the family." I took out my phone. I opened a new email addressed to Melissa. In the subject line, I typed, "What you owe the family." In the body of the email, I typed a single number, $35,000. Below it, I attached a scan of the promissory note. I hit send. Then I put my phone face down on the table, picked up my tea, and looked at the garden. The light was going gold. The rosemary along the back fence was thick and fragrant and very green. The mug was warm in my hands, the same warmth it had always had, the warmth of something used and loved and kept. Outside, the garden held its color. Inside, the house was quiet in a way that belonged to me now. And the tea, for the first time in a long time, tasted exactly right.